You've spent this entire channel learning about civilization after civilization getting high, drunk, or medicated in some form. At some point you have to wonder, was there ever a single exception? One ancient society that just said no, that built an entire culture without mind-altering substances anywhere in the picture? Today we're going looking for that civilization. We're going to check every corner of the ancient world for it. And the answer we land on is going to tell you something a lot more interesting than a simple yes or no. A quick note before we start. This video looks at the historical and anthropological record of substance use across ancient cultures purely as a factual question about human civilization, not as guidance or endorsement of any kind. Let's set the bar first, because fully sober needs a real definition or this whole search is pointless. We're not asking whether a civilization avoided one specific drug. Almost every culture managed that. We're asking whether any civilization existed with zero documented mind-altering substance use across its entire history. No alcohol, no smoked or ingested psychoactive plants, no ritual intoxicants, nothing. That's the actual bar. Let's see who clears it. Let's start with the obvious first stop, ancient Mesopotamia, the so-called cradle of civilization. Because if any culture was going to be dry, you'd think it'd be the first one, before intoxicants had time to spread anywhere. Instead, Mesopotamia gives us some of the oldest written evidence of alcohol production on Earth. The Sumerians had a goddess dedicated specifically to beer, Ninkasi, and an entire hymn written in her honor around 1800 BC that doubles as, essentially, the oldest known beer recipe in human history. Beer wasn't a vice in Sumerian society. It was closer to a dietary staple, safer to drink than untreated water in many contexts, consumed by essentially everyone, workers, priests, royalty, and that's before we even get to opium, which the Sumerians were cultivating and referring to as hulgil, the joy plant, as early as 3400 BC. Mesopotamia isn't a candidate for sober civilization. It might be the least sober candidate on this entire list. Fine. Let's move to ancient Egypt, a civilization famous for order, precision, monumental discipline. Surely somewhere in there is a culture that kept things clean. Except we've covered this extensively on this channel already. Opium residue found in ceremonial vessels shaped like poppy pods, blue lotus flowers depicted constantly in tomb art and banquet scenes. Dried blue lotus petals found scattered directly across the mummified body of Tutankhamun himself. And beyond the substances themselves, Egypt actually had an entire sanctioned religious festival built specifically around achieving collective intoxication, the Festival of Drunkenness, associated with the goddesses Hathor and Sekhmet, where temple inscriptions describe the pharaoh and royal court drinking heavily as a religious obligation, not a moral failing. Egypt isn't just not sober. Intoxication was baked directly into official state religion at the highest level. Let's try ancient Greece, home of philosophy, rational inquiry, the birthplace of Western logic itself. If discipline of mind was ever going to produce a sober culture, this feels like the place. Except Greek civilization gave us the Eleusinian mysteries, a secret religious ritual attended for centuries by Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, almost certainly involving a psychoactive beverage derived from ergot-contaminated barley, according to research co-authored by the chemist who synthesized LSD. And that, separate from wine, which was so deeply woven into daily Greek life that watering down your wine improperly was considered a genuine social faux pas, and drinking it completely undiluted was associated specifically with barbarians and excess. Greece doesn't just fail the sober test. Some of its most celebrated philosophical achievements may have happened directly under the influence. At this point, you might expect at least one civilization to break the pattern somewhere outside the Mediterranean and Near East, so let's go to ancient China. Confucian philosophy, after all, emphasizes discipline, moderation, correct behavior. Except China gives us one of the most extreme documented cases of ruling class intoxication in the ancient world. King Zhou of the Shang dynasty and his reported wine pool and meat forest, a level of court excess later. Chinese historians used for 3,000 years as the textbook warning against losing yourself to intoxication. And regardless of how embellished that specific account is, alcohol production in China dates back independently to at least 7000 BC, based on residue found in pottery at the Jiahu site, among the earliest fermented beverage evidence anywhere on the planet. China isn't the exception. If anything, it might be one of the oldest continuous alcohol-producing cultures we have direct evidence for. Let's cross an entire ocean and try somewhere with zero contact with any of these old-world civilizations, the pre-Columbian Americas. Surely isolation produces at least one clean result. Instead, we get the Andes, where coca chewing shows up in archaeological sites tied to ritual, endurance, and communication with mountain spirits, preserved directly in mummified remains in small woven bags called chuspas. We get Mesoamerica, where psilocybin mushrooms were used in religious and divinatory contexts well documented into the colonial period. We get North American traditions using tobacco not casually but as a sacred substance central to diplomacy, healing, and communication with the spirit world. Complete geographic isolation from Europe, Africa, and Asia, and the exact same underlying pattern emerges completely independently anyway. So by this point, the pattern isn't just most ancient civilizations use substances. It's that every single major civilization we have detailed archaeological or historical records for engaged in some form of intentional, culturally significant altered consciousness practice, not as a fringe activity, as something frequently embedded directly into religion, medicine, diplomacy, and governance. This consistency is exactly what led researchers to something called the intoxication hypothesis, proposed most notably by the psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel, arguing that the drive to alter consciousness might function as a genuine fourth biological drive in animals generally, not just humans, sitting alongside hunger, thirst, and reproduction. And the evidence supporting this isn't limited to humans. Elephants in the wild deliberately seek out fermented marula fruit. Reindeer in Siberia eat psychoactive Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and other reindeer then deliberately drink the urine of the ones who ate them, because the psychoactive compounds pass through mostly intact. If the drive shows up this consistently across species, not just across every human civilization we've checked, that's an extraordinarily strong signal that we're looking at something biologically fundamental rather than a cultural coincidence that happened to repeat itself independently on every inhabited continent. Now, to be completely fair and thorough here, there are a few edge cases worth addressing directly, because a good answer has to engage with the strongest counter-arguments, not just the easy wins. What about specific religious sects within larger civilizations that mandated abstinence? These did exist, certain ascetic monastic orders, specific priestly castes bound by particular vows. But these were subgroups embedded within larger societies that were themselves not sober, meaning the civilization as a whole still fails the test, even if a specific bounded community within it maintained genuine abstinence. That's an important distinction. Individual or group sobriety absolutely existed. Entire civilizational sobriety did not. What about extremely small, isolated hunter-gatherer bands with no access to any psychoactive plants in their specific microenvironment? This is the most genuinely plausible edge case, and it's worth taking seriously. It's certainly possible that some small, isolated group at some point in history existed in an environment with literally no locally available mind-altering plants and no trade contact to acquire any. But here's the problem for our search. We don't actually have a documented example of this. Every hunter-gatherer society anthropologists have studied in enough detail, historical or still existing today, shows some form of intentional substance use, even if the specific plant available differs wildly by region. The absence of evidence for a fully sober, isolated band isn't proof it never existed, but after searching this thoroughly, it means we can actually claim to have found one. So, here's the honest answer to the question in the title. Based on the full archaeological and historical record we currently have access to, no, there is no confirmed fully sober ancient civilization. Every major culture we have real evidence for engaged in some deliberate form of altered consciousness, whether through alcohol, smoked plants, ingested substances, or ritual practices, and did so consistently enough and independently enough across completely disconnected regions of the planet That it stops looking like a series of separate cultural choices and starts looking like something closer to a fixed feature of being human. Which honestly reframes the entire question this channel keeps asking. Over and over, video after video. We keep looking at ancient drug use like it's a strange historical footnote, an occasional lapse in otherwise sober societies. But if literally every civilization we can find evidence for did this, independently, repeatedly, and often built entire religious and medical systems directly around it, then maybe altering consciousness isn't the exception in human history. Maybe it's one of the actual baseline ingredients of what building a civilization has always required. Every temple, every philosophy, every empire we've covered on this channel was built, at least partly, by people who were, at some point, deliberately not sober. And as far as the historical record can currently tell us, that might not be a coincidence. It might just be what civilization has always looked like.